In my first week, I hit the brakes hard and realized that my wood stove wasn't secure to the floor and it had come loose. So that pulled the chimney and made a major leak. We had a rainstorm for a couple days and there was just water pouring down my chimney. I was collecting it in little mugs at the bottom, hoping to keep my floor from moisture issues, basically. So item 1 on the agenda for fixing things was to bolt down the stove. It's not going anywhere, but I still have leak problems. The basic problem was that the chimney moved and it pulled the silicone seal on the roof cap off. So to stop the chimney from ever moving again, I took 2 self-tapping screws and I screwed them directly into the wood stove so that chimney isn't going to move anywhere. And I decided that I would kill 2 birds with 1 stone and shorten my chimney. It's really obviously a chimney, and I would rather it look more like a vent and just not stick up so high because branches were also hitting it, and that may have also contributed to the fact that it started to leak. So I pulled off the silicone and cut down the roof pipe. Then I reattached the existing rain guard. The result is a lot shorter, a lot stealthier. It doesn't scream chimney right away, although, second thought will tell you that that is what it is, of course. Here's a look at it from up top with the silicone seal redone. There were some holes in the aluminum that would leak water when it rained into the insulation. That's not good, so I filled them with some putty and then I basically just sprayed it with a white primer spray paint. It's not the prettiest fix, but it works. On a much different note, I started making some curtains for the windows. So I cut a piece of curtain wire and put 2 little hooks in the very top of the window sill here. To make the curtains, I used an old, mustard colored scarf that I had that I was planning on doing some sort of project with, but never did anything with. And I cut it into 2 strips. Then I hemmed the edges. The top and bottom were fine. Then I basically looped over the top so that it fit perfectly in the space that I needed and hung that, and it works great as a curtain. I can part it both ways, so I still get a lot of functionality with it. This is the situation with my spice drawer. The spices would just move around inside the drawer, getting on top of other things, and there was just no organization. So I took 2 thin pieces of wood and I made a slot on either side. Then I took a strip to go between them, and this will hold my spices in place. Turns out I have exactly enough spice to do 2 rows, so that's what I did. This hook-shaped L bracket on the kitchen shelf also had an unstained edge, and there was a hole that needed to be filled with wood filler, so I did both those. The escape hatch was not looking very good, so I decided that I needed to trim it out because obviously this just looks terrible. So I started by lining the edges with some boards, and then I created a frame, which would be the part that you mostly see. This will be the trim. And I rounded off the corners, I used pocket holes to attach it all together, and then I mounted it underneath. So this frame is exactly the size that I have for the screen and bit of insulation that came with the previous build. Those are both necessary things, but they wouldn't really stay up. When I was driving, they'd fall out. So I decided what I would do is I'd cut out these little discs and then cut a corner in them so they look like little Pac-Men. And then I stained that. I stained the framing so that it would look a little bit better with the ceiling. And then I screwed those pieces into the corners. Now they turn so that you can sort of unlock or lock the insulation or screen in place. I faced a similar problem with a channel above where the roll-up door goes in. You can still see the tape and all that. So my solution to that was to cut thin strips of blue felt and glue those in place because there's really not room above the door. The front corner near the cab was also unfinished. I started by cutting off the box of the door well by running a 1x6 from the bottom of the floor to the top of the ceiling. To cover the thin reflective thermal barrier, I cut out some thin pieces of plywood, I spray painted them with a white primer, and then I painted them a dark, rich blue to go with the door frame and the mural in that corner. These I then screwed to cover up the reflectix on the vertical surfaces. To cover the change in depth, I created a shelf with the same curved stopper as I used for my bookshelf. Beside this, there was another gap where you could see insulation, so I cut a little L-shaped contraption to sort of serve as a baseboard and part of the flooring to cover up that gap. I'd made the decision to paint my walls white, and I wanted to do that before I finished making shelves because it would be easier to paint the walls and then make the shelves than mask around them. However, I did have to mask around everything that I'd already made. I got a natural low VOC paint, and I did a whitewash mix with some water, 2 parts paint, 1 part water, and then I just started painting. I painted one side first so that I could then have that dry and be able to sit down on my couch. Then I went across next to where I was working with the shelves. That required me to actually remove the heat shield, so once that paint was dry, I put that back up. Then I painted the area behind the bed. Doing so required me to remove the lids on the boxes on the foot of the bed. So while I had them off, I sanded down the edges to give a smoother look, and I stained those edges to match. The one part that I didn't paint was actually an area behind my desk, because I just sort of liked the way that looked with the wood. After all that, it was time to get back to making shelves. So I cut some thin strips to go by the blue shelf area, and I held those in place with just some small L brackets. After that, it was time for me to make a bunch of those curved lips to keep things on those shelves, which required a lot of sanding and a lot of cutting with the jigsaw. But once they were in place, it looked really good. However, they did stick out a little bit past the edge of the 1x6 that formed one side. That's because I wanted them to line up on the other side with the door frame, so I cut a thin piece to sort of act as a rail, which I could then connect those two. Next to this, I cut out a small shelf. This is going to serve as an altar. I've had one of these in every home I've ever lived in, and it's really important. The little knickknacks on top are held in place with Gorilla mounting tape, and I just put some hooks underneath so I could hang things like my drain and my backpack. To go above this, I started to create 2 shelves. These consist of a shelf, a lip, which has the same curved features as the rest, and a base that it's resting on. And then I cut an end piece that's kind of got a funky curve to it to sort of connect them and serve as the edge next to the heat shield. The decision to paint the walls white came after I've been living in this for about 2 months. I really liked the way that the pine looked, but there wasn't enough light in the van to really pull it off. So I found that it was very dark most of the time. For a very few hours, depending on where I was parked, it all looked great, and then immediately it would go very, very dark. So I really wanted to lighten it up, and I'm actually very, very happy with the white. I think it makes it feel a lot more like a home, maybe, a bit more like a house as opposed to a cabin. I love the cabin. There's still lots of wood, but it's just a little bit different now. So you still see a lot of the pattern in the wood. I like that. And it really makes the accent wall made out of pallets pop a lot more, whereas before there was just, I feel like removing that one type of wood really helped bring out the other parts of the other wooden pieces of this van that I really like. The ceiling, the floor, the pallets. So with the pine walls, that was just maybe everything was just sort of getting lost and muddied. With this white background, it can stand out a little bit more. So I'm very, very happy with the way that the kitchen looks. I did really like the way that this wall looked as pine. I think it probably looked better with the pine, but it did not look good when I tried it just with pine on its own with the 2 walls being white. That looked really out of place. So that is going to remain the way it is, and I'm still very happy with it.